So my story will have quite a bit to it. I kind of divided it up into chapters mentally in my mind. I sometimes tend to speak fast, so I've tried to slow myself down so that I'm clear. I also condensed quite a bit of things. There was a lot to it, but I wanted to kind of simplify, so this will be my best shot at it. So my siblings and I were born in that famous border town, Del Rio, which has been in the news in the past couple of years. Back then, it was not the way it was now. So it was a pretty good place to grow up in. I was the oldest of 3 kids, and we were first-generation Texans. So my mother was from the Chicago area. Thank you, Chicago area, and my dad was from Mexico, and so kind of have a little bit more of a Midwestern sound. Me and my brothers probably, but when we were growing up, we weren't really raised in a Christian home. My mom did go to a Christian Science church that she had gone to a church like that in Chicago, but my dad had been raised Catholic. He, however, had no desire to be part of the Catholic Church, or any church for that matter. And when we lived there, my mom would sometimes bring us to her church, but during the early elementary school years, I would say, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, didn't really understand the teachings much. They used the Bible in another book, and that other book was written in like English from the 1800s, so it was not real clear cut. So people I thought were friendly, but there weren't a lot of other young kids there. Most of the time we sat with our mom in the service. But when we would visit our grandparents in Mexico, they would sometimes bring us to Mass, which obviously a completely different environment than my mom's church. But again, there wasn't really a clear understanding on my part of the messages. My mom, despite that, did her best to instill in us good values, telling the truth, working diligently in school, being generous, those kinds of things. So we moved to this area when I was about to start 3rd grade. And around that time, the family dynamics just began to be more tense and even somewhat dysfunctional, I would say. But by the time we'd moved here, we rarely went to church with my mom. My dad was just not in favor of the idea at all. But he didn't push us to go to Catholic church either. So we were expected to behave, be good, even if our parents or others did not always set a good example. And as I got older, the family dysfunction just slowly got worse. I would be moody at certain times. I would be withdrawn. Didn't have a lot of close friends in school. And in those years, I carried the weight of my anxiety, frustration, resentment, at what I perceived as do as I say, not as I do. And by my senior year of high school, I was ready to be out of the house and just be completely independent. So a few months after high school graduation, I began freshman year at UT. And for most of us, that's a big adjustment in many ways. And I had more responsibilities, of course, but also more freedom, which initially I really liked. But also came the worldliness, which a lot of the secular universities were starting to become, there just became more of an anything goes, drug use on campus, hooking up, just whatever it was. I appreciated the diversity of people, and there were many different, classes, many different areas of study. But I began to have just more increased anxiety on my part, academically, financially, and relationally. So it was just a big, almost constant sense of anxiety on my part. My peers, like almost everybody, were looking for acceptance through friendships and particularly dating relationships, and that was no exception. I dated on and off throughout college, but no relationship really lasted more than a few months. And it was always the same pattern. You'd have that being interested in someone, the infatuation, followed by a series of, fun dates, but then the insecurities would set in, and I or the other person, could see the true colors of the other person, and the relationship wouldn't last beyond that usually. But then during my senior year of college, there was a girl who I think tried to witness to me. She had had her backpack stolen or something, and she had just incredible grace about it. And she was trying to witness to me, and there was another lady from another group where they were trying to invite me to come and be part of their church. So maybe a seed or two was planted, but, at the end of that short time, it would just be like, I got to study, I got to do my part-time job, the responsibilities and everything just, the root was choked out, basically. But during my senior year of college, I also began interviewing with companies for the first job. But back in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of offers. I think there might have been something economically going on. But then I interviewed with a company based in Decatur, Illinois. And I did not know much about the company. They would fully train, they would, have full benefits, pay was pretty good. The catch was that I would have to do a series of rotations throughout the Midwest, which I thought I was ready for. So against my better judgment, I accepted that job offer, and thus began the chapter of living in Illinois for what I thought would be a few years, but ended up being about 24 years for some reason. So a couple months into that new job, I was in denial. I think that I thought I could do the job, but it became clear to me, it became clear to the management of that company that I really was not cut out for it. It would have been being somebody who was trying to sell the grain for the farmers and maybe deal on the Board of Trade in Chicago. So I was terminated with severance pay, but I did not know what to do. I had driven up with some people all the way from Texas up to Illinois to start that job, and I just felt very defeated. My stress level obviously was very high, so I called my maternal aunt, who was just a little south of Chicago, and she said, we'll figure this out, go ahead and drive to our house. It would have been just a couple hours, and we'd figured it out. So I ended up staying with them for about 7-8 months, and I worked temp jobs, had my resume ready in case I would find a company I could be full-time with. And finally, I interviewed with Zurich American Insurance Company and accepted the offer. Back then, you could accept the offer like within a few days. Now it takes probably weeks, as some of you could probably attest. And things started looking up. I found a roommate closer to that part of the suburbs. And again, had more responsibilities and more freedom. So I kind of went back to the mindset I had when I was in college. Work hard, take care of your responsibilities. But I also pursued a few dating relationships. And these lasted from a few months to about a year. They just left me feeling empty and just feeling like life just didn't really, just wasn't satisfying. It just became the daily grind, basically. But God would soon be at work. And so while I was with my first roommate, I had a medical emergency, and that would be used by God to change my direction. I ended up going to the ER somewhere in Chicago. They tried to find out why I was in pain. They were doing different tests, different things, but they could not find the cause. So this was back in the days when they had the HMOs. And so if they couldn't find what was wrong, I guess they had to discharge. So they did that. I ended up getting a taxi to go back to my car, but I was not sure if I'd even be able to work the next day. But so just out of desperation, with the little bit that I knew, I prayed to God, a God that I didn't really know, for healing. And I began to feel much better the next day, so then I promised the Lord that I would seek out a church, but the procrastination tendency in me just kind of kept putting it off, didn't happen right away. But God was still faithful. And about 18 months later, my then second roommate was befriended by some people at her job, and one of them invited her to a really large church nearby us. So my roommate, of course, accepted, and then by extension, she invited me to come, and I eagerly agreed. Somehow I was like, okay, I remember what I said to you, Lord, about 18 months ago, and I want to just, I guess I thought of it as I wanted to learn more about the Lord and just see if that might be the solution. So the first sermon that we attended, this was back in 1997, the fall of 97, was from James 4 about submitting to God. And it was just what I needed. The topic could not have been more timely. So we kept going back week after week, and what struck me was I'd never heard preaching that was just clear and compelling and had such authority. And he often said something to the effect of, don't just go by what I'm saying up here, what I'm preaching up here. Look in the Word, in the Bible for yourself, and just check. So it was I think they call it the Berean approach. So in time, my roommate was baptized maybe about 7 or 8 months later, and made her decision to follow the Lord. And from having gone week after week after week, maybe about a year or more, I realized, there's going to come a time when I have to get off the fence and see what is it I really believe, and come to the decision of I'm going to pursue, the Lord and His ways of doing things, or I'm going to go back to my old ways. So a lot of compelling teaching, which was good in those early years. And I wanted the mercy, the love. I wanted His guidance. So I made the decision around January 1999, and then they didn't do baptisms all the time. So a few months later, some spaces opened up, and I indicated that I wanted to be baptized. And so then I experienced, the honeymoon phase, a lot of growth at that large church, joined a Bible study, began serving in a few ministries, children's ministry, ministry to refugees who were coming to Chicago, a few different things. I enjoyed worshiping and the many fellowship opportunities from being at a large church. And I think I thought I would be there forever because I had been there close to 16 years. But by 2013, a significant number, not the majority, but a significant number of my friends had left. And I just started to see that the church was really into church plants, planting them all throughout the suburbs, all throughout the country, and eventually internationally, expanding their existing locations, making those bigger. But this required regular funding campaigns just for everything that they wanted to do. They were very ambitious. And members, those of us who were members, just felt a lot of pressure to increase their giving. And even some of the people who were more the leaders started saying, they're not saying anything about specific amounts, but we feel like we should step up what we're giving. And I think some people just felt uncomfortable with that. There were people who wanted different music styles of worship. They didn't want, 12 people up on the stage and the electric guitar and drums and everything like that. So that was another reason. But they just were very big on promoting their name. And I thought to myself, what if there's people who are going to other churches that come to our church from time to time because there's no singles ministry at their church, there's no women's ministry, whatever. And here we're promoting our church brand so heavily does that maybe make them a little bit uncomfortable? It was great being at that large church, but sometimes, you start understanding that no place is perfect, and your mind is kind of more open to, maybe there's other places I can check out. So, okay, so soon after Sasha and I were married, we did start attending a medium-sized church closer to our home. The people were mostly older, I would say 55 plus, but they were very welcoming. The messages were very Bible-based. We were there about 5 years, but then we made the decision to move to Texas. For me, it was moving back to Texas. So September, a little over 3 years ago, we came here to the Haven, and we've attended ever since. And I just, continue growing. Even since being a believer on this 20-plus year journey, I've had ups and downs, as I'm sure everyone can relate to that. There were times when I struggled with the anxiety, with remnants from my early years, what we call first formation in the faith walking. And from time to time, I struggled with not just anxiety, but guilt. One of the examples was, maybe should I have been closer to my family during the time that I was up in Illinois? But I've also, throughout the last few years, struggled with the loss of family members. My mother in 2000, my younger brother in 2008 from natural causes. My mother in 2013, very sudden, struggled with that. And what made that hard was it was about 5 months before I got married. And so she wasn't going to be there at my wedding. So I really kind of struggled with that, and it was just really looking for scriptures that would comfort me. And had a miscarriage in 2015, the day after Valentine's Day, which was difficult. But I did have comfort from numerous people, and they told me, there's hope that you will see your unborn child in the future. So that was very comforting. A few other relatives have passed, more extended family in the past few years. But also just last month, our cat that I'd had for about 14 years, passed from cancer. So there's still been some difficult things to deal with. But now that I've been here, now that I started going through faith walking, which kudos to Scott and anyone else who's teaching it, because it's really some great stuff. It's really helped me deal with some of these issues of guilt, anxiety, grieving a loss. And I just hope to continue on this journey, and hopefully we all would, until God calls us home. And I am glad in a way that the Lord took me that I chose, and God allowed me to go to another state, because it was there that everything unfolded, and I began to seek the Lord sincerely. And so I am thankful for that. 24 years, that's kind of a long time, but I'm back in my home state now. So